All right, so hello from my slightly vacuum noisy apartment in Kansas City, Missouri. Good afternoon. Um, I'm gonna wait like 1 second, so hopefully he gets further down the staircase so that I can, go on a little bit quieter. But hopefully it won't be too loud. I might have to go yell at him. Great. So my name is John Elizabeth Stintzi. Thank you for joining me for this reading from Vanishing Monuments through Canada Performs. I am a non-binary writer of poetry, novels, short fiction, whatever it is. I write it all. Originally from Northwestern Ontario, Canada, currently in Kansas City, Missouri, as I said. But yeah, I was the recipient of the 2019 RBC Brown and Wallace Award for Emerging Writers from the Writers' Trust of Canada, the 2019 Malahat Review Long Poem Prize. I've been published all over the gaff in places like the Fiddlehead, the Malahat Review, Black Warrior Review, Kenyon Review, and Plowshares, including an array of other places. If you are curious to know more about that, check out my website. You can find it at johnelizabethstintzi.com or junebat.com or vanishingmonuments.com or even johnstintzi.com. I'm a hoarder of domains, and they all sort of funnel into the great content that I provide. So yeah, I am the author, of course, of Vanishing Monuments, whichever direction you want to look, Vanishing Monuments, as well as the poetry collection June Bat from House of Anansi. I am doing another reading of this through Canada Performs next week. Follow me on, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever, if you want to hear about that. But I'm not going to be reading any poems from that today. These books both just came out, so not the best time to be publishing books, but that's that. So before we get into it, I do want to thank the Canada Performs for having me, as well as them. I'd like to thank Facebook, Slate Music, the RBC Foundation, Sirius XM Canada, and the National Arts Center, who is the person that's putting on Canada Performs. For all of those people for making this possible. It's really a nice thing to offer during a very strange and uncertain time for authors and writers and poet and musicians and all of these Canadian professionals that are suddenly losing revenue and losing sort of the possibility of having all of this reach that might have been possible before because of this pandemic thing that you're hopefully aware of. So, I was, personally, I was set to do like a 20 city book tour or something like that. I don't remember exactly the number, but like across the US and Canada, like it was a really robust and exciting tour for someone that's coming out with books from indie presses. And part of that was that I have two, and they were, we were teaming up. There was synergy. It was all going to happen. And then everything happened, as you know. So I didn't get to do any of those events. But I do get to be here, sitting in front of my window, trying to look nice, trying to speak well while a vacuum cleaner is going on in my stairwell, because nothing can go right. Nothing can go just perfectly during this pandemic. So yeah, I'm going to be reading today from Vanishing Monuments. I don't think I need to do an introduction to my reading because I'm just going to read like the first 10 pages or so. So I don't think I need to introduce the book. You shouldn't have any. I mean, if I did my job, you will feel like you're getting the information you need to understand what's going on as it goes, because it's the first 10 pages. So I shouldn't need to introduce it. But I will say, after the reading, I am going to answer some questions. So please, as I'm reading, if there's something that strikes you, if you end up being curious about something, drop it in the live chat, and I'll scroll up and find some after I've finished, because and I encourage you to do that so I don't have to sit here being like, does anyone have any questions? For like 5 minutes after I finish reading, just so that we can try to have it be the most sort of engaging and, best experience possible. So if you have any questions and you're afraid you might forget it, obviously, just throw it in there and I'll circle around and try to find it, and we can talk about it. So yeah, I'll just jump right into it. Oh yeah, and Vanishing Monuments is published by Arsenal Pulp Press, based out of Vancouver, British Columbia. They've done a beautiful job, as you can see, publishing this book. I've been so happy to work with them. And if you want to get a copy of the book, I totally encourage you to buy it directly from Arsenal, but you can also buy it if you're in the United States from bookshop.org or whatever indie bookstore you love. And in Canada, same thing, whatever place you want to support and makes sense to you to support. If you're interested in supporting me, I want you to support who you want to support most. And if there's like a bookstore on the corner that's doing like curbside pickup, and that's a place you want to exist after this pandemic quiets, I would definitely encourage you to just, put in an order, call them up, be like, can you order this book? They should be able to. So I totally encourage you to do that, because, these are the, indie bookstores are great. At the end of the day, they're doing a lot of really good work. And, I was supposed to be in 1 billion of them this year. And now who knows if I will be in much of any. So I encourage you to just support who you want to support. My dog is walking around, being very curious. So ignore me. Forgive me if I occasionally look off screen, because, he doesn't know that I'm streaming. So this is the first 10 pages or so of Vanishing Monuments. When the doctor calls, I'm standing in the kitchen in my little house in Minneapolis, drinking the microwaved ends of this morning's coffee. And as soon as the doctor says the words about Hedwig Baum, about mother, the girl who runs away comes back into my bones. She takes over, like a surfer on a wave of fear. The first thing she does is put down the coffee and move me into the bedroom to grab the old camera from its place atop the cabinet where I keep all my gear. As soon as she makes my hands lift that old coated brass machine, and as soon as she's slung its strap around my neck, something I do most days without her, I know she's built up too much momentum to stop, to stay. This camera, this old Leica 3, was hers, mother's. The mother whose dementia the doctor is telling me appears to have taken completely her already dwindling capacity for speech. The dementia she's been living with about half as long as the 17 years she had with me. While the doctor talks into my ear, the running girl pulls out from under the bed the piece of luggage. Luggage I don't think I've used since Jenny and I went to Chicago in 2007 for a talk I was giving on the body as an indirect object in figure-based art. The talk that came after I'd watched the I-35 West Bridge collapse into the Mississippi from the bridge beside it, the 10th Avenue Bridge that I was driving across. Watched the bridge and Jenny's trust in engineering and infrastructure and our whole world fall out of sight. Luggage I hadn't used since we tried to take her away from here to pull her out of that. We've been keeping an eye on her, the doctor says, as the packing continues, and she hasn't spoken as far as we can tell in roughly a week. Her responsiveness to being addressed has also decreased. She has had accidents, well, more. This is the first time the running girl has come to usurp my body since I ran away to Hamburg, Germany in 1991, to escape Jenny and the relationship I thought I was in, to try to get away from the me that I'd been living as, which had suddenly felt like a lie. The first time the running girl ever took over completely was when I ran away from mother, from Winnipeg, with Jenny when I was 17. In the middle of the night, having removed my bedroom window with a pry bar. That was the last time I was there, in Winnipeg, almost 30 years ago. That night was the first time the running girl grabbed the camera, the first time that girl got her way. Mother was not speaking then either, but for a different reason. I'm sure I've said things to the doctor. I'm sure I've been asking questions for clarifications. I'm sure some part of me has, but I haven't been there to take note of them. The longer the conversation goes on, the more I've been following the hands, the more I've been using my legs to move my body through the house to let the running girl's hands grab what they want to. Bedroom to bathroom to bedroom to kitchen to bedroom to living room to bedroom. I cannot figure out what to focus on. The hands grabbing from my gear cabinet a lens for my Hasselblad and my old copy of Ovid's Metamorphoses that I stole from my high school library, or the doctor who was talking about a recent study about similar aphasia in patients with dementia. I focus on neither and fade into a relative peace, focusing instead on the breath in the body, until eventually the luggage is zipped up, ready, and I'm standing over it with my phone still pressed to the side of my face. I listen to the doctor, but there's nothing, just silence, because the phone call has already ended in one way or another without my realizing. I pull my phone from my ear, and the side of my face is left with a rectangle of sweat. I text Karen to tell her that I won't be able to make it to the collective's board meeting, that I have to go out of town. When she calls me a minute later, as I knew she would, I'm stuffing the luggage into the back of my little car. I stop to stare down at the vibrating phone in my hand until it stops, until Karen goes to voicemail. Then I close the trunk and climb in. I know that Karen won't call again, that she's going to rush to my house to try and catch me, to try and get more information from me. But as I turn on the car, I also know there's nothing anyone can do to stop me. The studio is a 17-minute drive away in good traffic. I'll be heading in the opposite direction. As I pull my car away from the curb, not knowing when I'll see this little house of mine, but not really caring about this house at all, I look across the street at Jenny's house. I tried not to look. Every molecule I own was instructed not to look, because I knew how much it would hurt, and I knew there was nothing I could do to stop that hurt from coming, for me and for Jenny. She will not understand, and she will also understand too much. I don't call her to let her know that I'm leaving, that I'm going back to Winnipeg for the first time since we ran away together. I know that if I called her to explain before I'd made it too far to turn back, I'd never make it. And I have to. Some ancient signal has been sent up to rally me back. Some signal has told me that the road to Winnipeg, to Mother, will be too overgrown if I stay away any longer. The call from the doctor has proven that it has just turned from late to too late. The running girl has a history of doing things far too late, of running from one burning building into another sparking start. But if I'm going to close any of the windows to my past, if I'm going to fight against the drafts, I have to go back right away. To make it to Mother, to that city, to pretend I've come back just in the nick of time. As I head north toward Winnipeg, I try not to think about Jenny, sitting oblivious in her office, evaluating plans for this highway or that bridge while I drive. I fail. I throw my phone into the back seat, out of reach. As I look at the clock and imagine her at this moment getting a call from Karen, as she drives toward the empty parking space in front of my house, letting her know that her partner has run away, suddenly, again. While I drive, I keep telling myself not to look back at the phone, and by the time I fail, I'm already too close to Winnipeg to turn the car around. This is happening. Just north of Fargo, parked at a gas station, I finally pick up the phone from the back seat. The sky is dark, spitting softly on my car. There's a voicemail waiting for me from Jenny, 6 missed calls and a string of texts. It takes all that I have to text her back. I'll call you tomorrow. It's Mother. When I turn off the phone, I don't need it for directions. I've already memorized the route from all the times I stared at the map and traced my finger along the here to there. from all the times I put the addresses into Google Maps the last few years, from all the times I zoomed in and used the farthest tip of my body to trail those highways north, all those directions, transcribing that journey into me, home. But before I pull out of the gas station, I look down at myself, bound up and packed, in black jeans and a dark tee. I go to the trunk and pull out a dress, a bra, and my makeup bag. I ball it all up and go into the station's bathroom and make myself that girl. One, the memory palace. You close your eyes and turn around, and there it stands, 2 stories tall, board and batten siding, painted white too many years ago, your memory palace. The concrete walkway, with weeds growing through cracks from so many winter thaws, snakes up to the gray-blue door. A big portrait window stares out from the first floor, from the living room. 2 small windows glare down at you from the floor above. Sometimes, when you turn around to face the palace, you are outside the old picket fence where the metal mailbox hangs, but most of the time the fence is not there, and you can walk right up to the front door without opening a gate that you never really knew closed. So you can go up the single step onto the landing, open the door, and go up the half step inside. The rest of the street, the rest of the city, the world is not here. You have to approach the palace excised from its contexts, alone as the house has never been, without distractions, without other places to go instead. This is the only place there is. There is only weather, if you choose to have it, but there is always wind, sometimes blowing you toward the palace, sometimes blowing you away. The grass out front is long and wispy, moving with the wind like tendrils, like a pit of snakes. When you approach the palace, you do not step off the concrete path, and on the path, you try to avoid every single crack. You fail. Inside the palace, should you make it there, is everything in your life that you need to remember. 27 years. It has been 27 years since I last drove across the border between Manitoba and Minnesota to follow Jenny as she started school in Minneapolis. It has been 27 years since I stepped on the sidewalks in Wolseley, in downtown Winnipeg, since I stood on the banks of the Assiniboine River, or the Red River, or at the forks where the 2 rivers merge. It has been 27 years since I stood on the landing of the house, put my key in the door, since that key lifted the pins in the lock and turned. It has been 27 years since I saw Mother's chest rise and fall, since I could not feel my fingers while I hung my coat in the hall. I've carried the key for Mother's house with me every day since the night in August when I last walked away from that house, without locking the door behind me. I've carried it every day for 27 years. It has been 28 years since I looked up at the Winnipeg sky in the middle of the night, lying beside my best friend Tom on his lawn, trying to find stars. It has been 32 years since I heard Mother laugh, 30 years since I heard her cry, horrible, deep, unhelpful sobs, and 30 years since I told her that I loved her and she mumbled incoherently into my ear. 15 years ago, Jenny and I had a connecting flight in Winnipeg when we were coming back from her father's wedding in Edmonton. But we didn't leave the airport. We waited there for 6 whole hours, watching tired but happy people, happy to be home, filing off flight after flight. For 27 years, the little key to Mother's house has sat next to the keys of apartments, offices, studios, and cars. Each of the other keys has changed, been replaced, each one but hers. It dangles beside the wheel, clinking probably, only too quietly to hear as I drive. It has been 4 days since I last saw a photograph of Mother. 3 weeks since I last called the home to get an update on her, when she'd still been speaking somewhat. 8 years since she was first diagnosed with dementia. 3 years since I coordinated with Dorothy, the day nurse I'd hired about 8 years ago to move Mother to the home. After she'd had what we agreed to call an accident and had to be placed in a controlled environment. 1 year since I started needing to take out loans. It has been 27 years, since I drove on this highway, the I-29. Only last time I was going south. It's dark and I'm passing Grand Forks and I can almost see behind the headlights I pass in the dark rain, them, Jenny Ford and me, Alani Baum. 2 kids escaping 2 untenable worlds. The staticky radio program playing from a station back in Fargo could well be the same exact one from that night. I know that if I don't listen closely, I can convince myself of that. And behind Alani's eyes, in the car that passes by, the running girl, inching away with a determination to stay away, but all the while starting the long, long odyssey that I'm now completing. Vanishing Monuments. All right, now I'm gonna hopefully that all went well. Yes, here we go. Wow. All right, I'm gonna hide this so it's all me. Also, I'm losing my voice a little because I was practicing this morning and then I just have been losing my voice because of it. So hopefully that all sounded good. I did want to share that if you wanted to know what that camera was, this is what the sort of camera that Alani is talking about that used to be their mother's. This is a Leica 3A, which is a slightly newer version of the one that is in the book. It's a real beautiful little machine that's a pain in the ass to use. Like you have to look through this to focus it and then look through this to frame it. And you obviously have to do all the little things. It's from like 1930s. It's a beautiful little machine, a pain in the ass, but I love it. And I knew at some point, having written this book, and that the camera is such a central part of the book that I just had to have it there and I had to own it. So I just thought I'd share that. I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was doing a real event, probably. So yeah, let's look and see if we've got yes, the exposed brick is great. I'm checking out the comments now. So yes, great. Okay, so Jonathan asks, how did I keep the overlapping timelines in the novel straight as I wrote? As you will discover when you get your copy of Vanishing Monuments and start reading it, it is a mess of past and present and various sort of times in the past as well. You know, Alani being back at home in Winnipeg when they're young, Alani being in Minneapolis with Jenny, Alani running away to Hamburg, Germany, which was alluded to, and all of these things back and forth that are happening in all of these different places and times. Like it's all sort of one big swirling mess in a way that hopefully doesn't feel like a swirling mess, but probably a little bit should. Yeah, I think I actually wrote it kind of in sections, I think, where I wrote like all of this stuff in Hamburg, and then I wrote all this stuff, I tried to just kind of like write each chunk in pieces, which is really why this novel was a pain in the ass to put together, I think, was, you know, I wanted to make sure that each of those sort of timelines and stories were complete, despite the fact that I chopped them up and, you know, sprinkled them throughout the book and sort of weave them through. I wanted to make sure that they were all sort of complete. So I kind of just would write all of the stuff for each part, like break them into sections that I knew. And I did that for pretty much each of the different sort of eras of the book that the book is sort of talking about. And then once I had that, I sort of, you know, chopped them up into little pieces and then, you know, started to rearrange them from there. But I really started with the idea that I had to do them each separately so that I could make sure that it was consistent and they were complete and they had everything that I wanted them to have. So that was sort of how I guess I kept it straight. I remember back in New Jersey when I was working on the earliest draft of this book, I printed out each of those sections and laid them out on the floor. Like we had one room in the apartment that was just like transitional and nobody was in there. So it was all across the floor, these big piles and long piles of things that I knew that I'd written unsequentially in terms of how I wanted them in the novel. And I knew I had to just piece them all together. And it was extremely overwhelming to look at. I think there were like 200 or so different sections of the novel that I had put in these piles, and I was very afraid. So I did that, and then I sort of saw where the holes were after I had sort of placed them into these piles, and so then I wrote the parts that I needed to sort of fill out those stories. So that's how I did that, and that's also what convinced me to use Scrivener, because if I had to do that in Microsoft Word, I was going to put a gun to my head. Yeah. All right. Let's see what we got here. It's a great question. Sonara wants to know why I chose Winnipeg. Did I always conceive of being set in Winnipeg? Does Winnipeg lend itself more to Memory Palace than other cities? It had always been in Winnipeg. I started it when I was in Winnipeg back in 2014 when I was at the tail end of my undergrad at the University of Manitoba. And I think once I got into it, I realized extra how much Winnipeg, I mean, anyone who's ever spent time in Winnipeg knows that Winnipeg is a very sort of traumatic and sort of heavy place in terms of memory. And it was for me because I went to, I was in college then, and a lot of shit happened in Winnipeg. So it was just like a very heavy and sort of dense place of memory, of like joyous and also horrible. And I think that Winnipeg, weirdly, is one of those places that is so sort of caught up in that in a way that other places I've been haven't been. Like there's such a ambivalence that people have to Winnipeg, where they love it and it's also terrible. I mean, there's that, the Weaker Than song, One Great City, which, the chorus is I hate Winnipeg or whatever, but it's also like a kind of love song to Winnipeg. So it's one of those cities that I think people feel really strong feelings for. So I think it was a very good place to set a novel like this, because everywhere you go, like, I mean, and this is more just for me, like wherever I go, and whenever I'm driving down Pembina or like walking around St. Vital Mall or taking a bus downtown, like there's all of this stuff that there's this sort of different layer of time that I'm also sort of traveling through, and like all these like really frustrating moments or really painful moments, and all these really fun times, like riding a bike through like just across the city in the middle of the night, and it's just like an empty wasteland but beautiful at the same time. I don't know, it's just one of those places that I feel like is really ripe for that sort of thing. Yeah. Let's see, do we have any more questions? I might have to go over to the actual YouTube, see if there's anything popping up. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any more questions. If I see one more jump up. Jonathan asks another question. What's one novel I wish I'd written because it's just so good? Oh man, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, there are any novel that I finish. I'm not a very good reader right now. And usually when people ask me like what my favorite book is, it's whatever I've read most recently. I think this is going to be very predictable to people like Jonathan who've been following me, but one book that blew my mind, and I couldn't write this book because it's a very set in a, about being like Asian American, but I Hotel by Karen T.A. I don't know how to pronounce the middle name, but Yamashita. Amazing book that I think honestly feels similar kind of to the project that Vanishing Monuments is a part of, and that's probably why I connected with it so much. Like it's sort of like it's like 10 or 12 different novellas that all exist sort of in the same time. And Vanishing Monuments actually is sort of a part of a triptych of novels. The first draft of it was 4 novellas. This is the expansion of the first one into its own novel, and it's a much better form, I think, having sort of connected and interconnected novels. And hopefully you'll see some of those in the years to come. But yeah, it's just something I'm really interested in, is these stories that are nearby one another but aren't necessarily sequential, or like they're not directly, this follows this. It's like suddenly you see characters and things overlap, and you get a different sense. Like it just feels so natural to the way that existence is. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Writers Trust of Canada asked if I can show us some photos I've taken with my camera. Oh, let me just see. I haven't actually put too many rolls through this one because it's such a pain to. It just takes a long time to do, and I have the problem of not enjoying street photography. I find it a little bit gross, and so I don't really have that many things to take pictures of. Like I don't find that many things interesting enough. But let me see if I can find something. I don't think I've taken any good photos with it, but let me see what we got. Photography. Probably not going to be able to find some stuff. It's been a while since I've really been able to do photography, mostly out of, I'm just kind of lazy, but it also is kind of expensive for the most part to process film. I haven't learned how to develop my own like film, like black and white film, and like, cause you can get like a like dark room bag that's that you can just do that without having to have a full dark room. And I've got like a scanner that should technically be able to scan them, but I'll post some on Twitter in response to like some tweet that I have. I'll post them on Twitter and I'll tag you, Writers Trust, and you can see the photos I've taken. But it'll take me too long to find stuff right now. All right, this is gonna be my last question because it's a good question, and because I don't think this is supposed to go on forever. But this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for joining me. Evan asks, was there an influence in your Northwestern Ontario childhood that inspired me to become a writer, something or someone local, or did I have to look digitally or to others or to cities for that inspiration? I would say that definitely I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Northwestern Ontario, and honestly, the living on a farm and like being like, you just have a lot of downtime and there's nowhere to go. So I think it's a great place to sort of like build an imagination just as like a survival tactic. So like me and my brothers would always like play Legos and come up with all these like little stories and stuff. And my parents were very supportive of education and all that. So my dog is jumping up. He's mad that I haven't been talking about him. So a lot of that, you sort of like learn to come up with stuff to entertain yourself. But my parents also, were very supportive of education. My mom was a journalist and was really pro reading. So I started reading really early, and I was really into, all these like, series of unfortunate events and all these little books. And I just was always excited about creating stuff. Like I was really excited about art. I'm still really excited about art. Obviously, I'm really excited about photography. There are all these things that I really love, and that is just like based in creative outlets, because it was just sort of the thing you could do back then. But a lot of it was, the landscape is beautiful, but also kind of like dull. That forces you to kind of like have to think about like if you've ever driven a tractor in a field in circles for 6 hours. You realize that you need an inner life and something to imagine in order to survive that without, wanting to just jump out and go into the wheels of it. So I think that honestly, there was a lot of just the conditions of becoming creative were much more accessible in a place like that. I don't know. it's a very, but yeah, I think, my mom was very supportive of reading and stuff, and probably, I just got lucky and just started writing, and people just were okay with my terrible poetry in high school. And then, that's what how that happened. Yeah. I guess I'll do one more because I just see this one more. This is also from the Writer's Trust. How does being a poet inspire my fiction? This is a great question, and one that I like to think about a lot. I think that there's no better way for, oh, Sue Lookout, great. In terms of the the poetry, I feel like there's no better way to become a better fiction writer than to write or read poetry. Just because I think that so much of my what makes my fiction so good to me, I think, is the sort of propulsive language and just the ways in which the sentences and the paragraphs can sort of like move and sort of like use grammar in a way that kind of keeps momentum going. And despite that, not always, my fiction isn't like always super plot heavy, though I think that I definitely do have a lot of plot in my book. I mean, this book takes place over 45 years basically or so, and there's a whole lot of story in there. But I think that it does really affect my language, and it does also affect what I decide to write as poetry and what I decide to write as fiction. I think that writing both has been really helpful to allow me to be more personal and autobiographical in the poetry, and then learn a little bit more about these things that obsess me, that I'm obsessed with and that I'm sort of fascinated with. And then that's the stuff that I then can then write about in fiction in a sort of grander way that doesn't necessarily have to be as rooted in my own story. So it allows me to be really autobiographical in the poetry, and then also allows me to expand and make more of that in other places. So I think that these two books actually are very kind of kin in that way. Like, I think it's very wonderful that they're both coming out right now, despite how bad it is that I have books coming out right now. I think they get along really well. So if you like Vanishing Monuments, you might check out June Bat, or if you like June Bat, you might check out Vanishing Monuments, because I think there are some interesting ways that they sort of bounce off one another. But yeah, so that's probably, I'll call it there. Grendel is very grumpily walking around the apartment, so I should probably go hang out with him a little bit. And since my voice is disappearing by the second, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you'll support your local bookstores, buying my book or other people's books, honestly, and that you follow along with hashtag Canada Performs and watch all the other cool artists that are doing these things. And yeah, if you're interested, check out my Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and follow me there, and stay in touch and stay healthy. All right. See you later. Bye.